The sheriff said the drifter was not welcome. She said the sheriff could mind his own business. Joaquin Estrada rode into Flint Creek, New Mexico territory on a bay mare with a split hoof and a temperament that matched the country, impatient, dry, and disinclined to waste energy on anything that did not matter. He was leading a pack mule loaded with leather cases, and the cases contained the tools of his trade, which was the doctoring of horses. Not the kind of doctoring that involved a diploma and an office. The kind that involved knowledge passed down from his grandfather in Sonora, hands that could feel a fracture through hide and muscle, and a reputation that traveled ahead of him through the ranching valleys of the territory the way a good horse's bloodline travels, by word of mouth, from one man who trusted it to another who needed it, visible from a distance, useful if you paid attention, gone before you could pin it down. He had been on the road for 3 months. Before Flint Creek there had been Cienega Springs, where he set the leg of a broodmare that the local veterinarian had wanted to shoot. Before that, Las Palomas, where he treated a colic that had killed 2 horses already and saved the third with a mixture of oil and herbs that he prepared himself and that smelled like something between a kitchen and a church. Before that, a string of small towns and large ranches that blurred together into a single continuous landscape of corrals, lame horses, skeptical ranchers, and the gradual accumulation of enough payment, sometimes cash, sometimes supplies, sometimes simply a meal and a place to sleep, to keep moving. He stopped at the general store because the mare needed grain, and he needed salt and coffee, and a new cinch strap for the pack saddle. The general store in Flint Creek was a low adobe building on the main street, with a tin roof and a porch, and a sign that said, Emery General Merchandise, in letters that had been painted with more care than the building deserved. Ruth Emery was behind the counter. She was 31, tall, with red-brown hair gathered at her neck, and the direct gaze of a woman who had learned to assess people quickly, because in the mercantile business, assessment was survival. She had inherited the store from her father, who had died of a heart attack at this same counter 2 years ago, face down in the ledger he was balancing. In the weeks after his death, 3 different men had offered to buy the store from her at prices that were insults dressed as charity, and a 4th had offered to marry her, which was a different kind of insult, dressed as a different kind of charity. She had declined all 4 offers, and continued running the store with the stubborn competence of a woman who refused to be told that a store was not a woman's business. She knew every product on every shelf, every outstanding account in the ledger, and every rancher's credit limit within $1, and she extended or withheld that credit with a judgment that her father would have recognized and respected. She watched Joaquin come through the door. She watched the way he removed his hat, the way his eyes moved around the store with the quick inventory of a man accustomed to entering unfamiliar rooms, the way he stood at the counter with the quiet courtesy of someone who expected to be treated well and would not be surprised if he was not. I need grain for my horse and salt and coffee for myself, he said. His English was clear and accented, each word placed with the precision of a man who speaks 2 languages and respects both. Grain is by the back wall. Salt and coffee are on the 2nd shelf to your right. He gathered what he needed and brought it to the counter and paid in coin, and was turning to leave when the door opened and Sheriff Boyd Crenshaw walked in. Crenshaw was the kind of lawman that small towns sometimes produce, a man whose authority was inversely proportional to his jurisdiction, and who compensated for the smallness of his territory with an expansiveness of opinion that covered everything from property lines to who belonged in town. He was not a cruel man. He was something in some ways worse, a man who believed his prejudices were principles and who enforced them with the badge as though they were law. He looked at Joaquin. He looked at the leather cases on the mule outside. He looked at Ruth. Who is this? A customer, Ruth said. A Mexican drifter, Crenshaw said, in the tone of a man correcting a misidentification. We do not need drifters in Flint Creek. Joaquin said nothing. He picked up his purchases and tucked them under his arm, and moved toward the door with the careful, unhurried movement of a man who has been in this situation before, in other towns and with other sheriffs, enough times that the sequence had become familiar. The questions, the suspicion, the suggestion that his departure would be appreciated sooner rather than later, and knows that speed is interpreted as guilt, and stillness is interpreted as defiance, and the only safe path is somewhere between the two. "Hold on," Crenshaw said. "Where are you going?" "To my horse." "Where did you come from?" "Cienega Springs. Before that, Las Palomas." "What is your business here?" "I doctor horses. I was passing through." "Then keep passing." Ruth set her hands on the counter. She set them down flat, the way a person sets down cards they intend to play. "Boyd," she said. "He is a customer. He paid for his goods. He has broken no law that I am aware of, and if you are aware of one, I would like to hear it." "I do not need a law. I need a reason, and I have not heard one. The reason is that he is a free man on a public road in a territory governed by the laws of the United States, and unless you have a warrant or a charge, you have no authority to tell him where he can and cannot be. That is the law, Boyd, not yours, the actual one." Crenshaw looked at Ruth the way he always looked at Ruth, with the frustrated incredulity of a man who cannot understand why a woman insists on having opinions about things that are not her concern. He looked at Joaquin, who was standing by the door with his hat in his hands, and his face composed, and his eyes watchful. "You have until morning," Crenshaw said. He said it to Joaquin, but he was looking at Ruth when he said it, and the message was clear. "This is between you and me, and the drifter is the field on which we are fighting." He left. The door closed. The store was quiet, except for the sound of the wind against the tin roof, and the mule shifting its weight outside. "I am sorry," Ruth said. "You have nothing to apologize for. I am apologizing for him, not for myself. That is a large debt to carry for someone else." Ruth looked at Joaquin Estrada and saw something that most people in Flint Creek did not bother to see, a man who was skilled and dignified and tired of being treated as though his presence required permission. She had seen that look before. She saw it in the mirror every morning, in the face of a woman who ran a business that half the town believed she had no right to run. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" she asked. "I was going to camp outside town. There is a room above the store. It is small and it is not fancy, but it has a bed and a stove and a door that locks. The sheriff said I have until morning." The sheriff said a great many things. Most of them were not law, and none of them were right. "Stay." He stayed. He carried his cases up the narrow stairs to the room above the store and unpacked his tools, the lances and probes and wrapped bundles of dried herbs that smelled of sage and eucalyptus, and something sharper that Ruth could not identify, and arranged them on the small table by the window with the precision of a surgeon preparing an operating theater. He fed his mare in the store's small corral and sat on the bed in the room that was small and not fancy, but had a door that locked, and he rested for the first time in 3 days. The trouble came the next morning, as trouble in small towns always does. Not with violence, but with politics. Crenshaw visited the 3 largest ranchers in the valley and suggested that allowing a Mexican horse doctor to practice in Flint Creek would set a precedent that none of them wanted. 2 of the ranchers agreed. The third, a man named Holcomb, whose best and most valuable saddle horse had been lame for a month, hesitated. Ruth heard about the visits before noon, because Flint Creek was the kind of town where information traveled faster than the people carrying it. She was standing on the porch of the store when Crenshaw rode past, and she called out to him in a voice that carried the length of the street. "Boyd, a word." He reined up. He did not dismount. "I believe we said everything that needed saying yesterday. You said everything you wanted to say. I did not. That man is a horse doctor with a reputation across 3 territories. George Holcomb has a lame horse that your fine local veterinarian cannot fix. And you are telling people to turn away the one man who might save that animal because of where his grandfather was born. This is not about his grandfather. This is entirely about his grandfather, and his name, and the color of his skin. And you know it as well as I do, and every rancher you spoke to this morning knows it, and the only question is whether any of them will have the courage to admit it." Crenshaw looked down at Ruth from his horse, with the expression of a man who has been struck in a place he did not know was vulnerable. He did not reply. He touched his hat and rode on, and Ruth went back into the store and stood behind the counter and breathed slowly until her hands stopped shaking, because confronting the law in a territory where the law could make your life very difficult, was not a thing to be done casually, and she had not done it casually. She had done it because it was right, and doing right things had a cost, and she was willing to pay it. Holcomb came to the store that afternoon. He came in quietly, the way men come in when they want something they are embarrassed to want. He stood at the counter and looked at Ruth and said, "That horse doctor, can he really fix a lame horse?" "I believe he can. Crenshaw will not like it. Crenshaw does not own your horse, George. And he does not own this town. And he does not own the right to decide who helps whom." Holcomb considered this. He was a practical man, and practical men eventually choose results over politics, especially when the results involve a horse worth $200. "Send him out," Holcomb said. Joaquin went to Holcomb's ranch the next morning. He examined the horse, a big sorrel gelding worth $200 with a swollen hock that had been lame for 5 weeks, with a thoroughness that impressed even Holcomb, who was not easily impressed. He ran his hands down the legs slowly, feeling each tendon and joint, then lifted the hoof and pressed along the sole with his thumb until the gelding flinched. He diagnosed an abscess deep in the joint that the veterinarian had missed because he had been looking at the leg instead of the foot, a mistake that Joaquin described without judgment, but with the quiet certainty of a man who knows his craft. Joaquin lanced the abscess, packed the wound with a poultice of his own making, and wrapped the hock with clean bandages, and by the 3rd day the horse was bearing weight, and by the 7th it was sound. Holcomb told his neighbors. His neighbors told their neighbors. Within 2 weeks, Joaquin had treated 9 horses across the valley, 3 lame, 2 colicky, 1 with a mysterious wasting condition that turned out to be bad teeth, and 3 with various wounds and infections that responded to his poultices the way dry ground responds to rain. His reputation in Flint Creek shifted from unwelcome drifter to the man you called when your horse was lame, and the regular vet shrugged, and the shift happened with the speed that only practical results can produce in a community that depends on horses for its livelihood. Crenshaw did not apologize. He did not change his mind. He simply stopped talking about it, which in a small town is the closest thing to an apology that a proud man can manage. Joaquin did not leave Flint Creek. He found that the room above the store suited him, and the valley suited his mare, and the ranchers suited his skills, and the woman who had told the sheriff to mind his own business suited something deeper than any of those things, something that had been homeless in him for a long time and had finally, unexpectedly, found a place to stay. He had been moving for 6 years, since leaving Sonora after his grandfather died, and the moving had become so habitual that he had stopped noticing what it cost, the absence of a place that was his, a table he returned to, a voice that expected him. Ruth's voice expected him. It expected him at supper and on the porch and at the counter when the store was quiet, and the expectation was not a demand but an invitation, and the invitation was the first one in 6 years he wanted to accept. Ruth found it too. She found it in the way Joaquin said her name, carefully, with the accent falling in a place that made it sound different from the way anyone else said it, as though he were saying a word in a language where the word meant more. She found it in the evenings when he came down from the room above the store and sat on the porch and told her about the horses he had treated, and the ranches he had visited, and the country he had crossed, and she told him about the ledgers and the inventory, and the particular frustrations of selling flour to people who believed a woman could not count. They married in the spring, on a clear April morning, when the camisa was blooming yellow along the creek, and the mountains still wore snow on their peaks, in the small adobe church at the end of the main street, with Holcomb and his wife as witnesses, and the bay mare and the mule waiting outside with the patience of animals who had learned that staying put was sometimes the bravest thing a creature could do. The woman who told the sheriff he could mind his own business, and the horse doctor who had been told to keep passing, built a life in Flint Creek that neither of them had planned, and both of them had needed. The store thrived, the practice grew, and the sheriff, over time, developed the habit of touching his hat when he passed the Estrada General Merchandise store, which was not respect exactly, but was the closest he could come to it, and Ruth accepted it, because she understood that change in stubborn men is measured in hat tips, not speeches, and a hat tip from Boyd Crenshaw was worth more than most men's declarations.